Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's presentation, Applying Digital Manufacturing Technologies to Create Operational Efficiencies. Before we begin, a few administrative items that we'd like to note. For the best webinar experience, please use Google Chrome or Firefox. If you do have any questions throughout today's presentation, please type them into the Q&A box that you see. You can enter that in at any time during the presentation. We will address as many questions as we can at the conclusion of the webinar, and then any questions left unanswered, we will address individually offline following today's presentation. Resources for you, including the presentation slides, are available to download in the resource panel on your screen, and all of the widgets that you see can be resized to fit your computer screen. You will also be receiving the on-demand recording of today's webinar via email within 24 hours after the webinar ends. Today's presentation is a part of Deltek's GovCon University webinar series designed to help government contractors gain greater knowledge and insights into important industry topics. We'll be coming up with a variety of topics throughout the remainder of 2022 as part of this special series, so be sure to check out deltek.com, events and webinars for future events. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our first speaker, Tara Cannon. Tara?
Thanks, Leslie. Hi, my name is Tara Cannon. I'm the Product Marketing Manager for Deltek's CostPoint product line. Joining me today is Jonathan Davis, who's a Principal Solutions Engineer in our manufacturing area for Deltek, and also Jesse Kepner, who's the Manufacturing Lead for PDS Consulting Solutions. So before we get into the good stuff, the chat that Jesse and Jonathan are going to have on digital transformation and manufacturing, I did want to update you guys on our Clarity Manufacturing readout. This is a new section for Clarity this year, and it provided some really good insights on what your peers are thinking and doing in the manufacturing space. Then I'll quickly go over a few manufacturing industry trends and then turn it over to Jesse and Jonathan for their fireside chat. After the chat, we will open up the chat for Q&A questions. So let's get into it. So Deltek's Clarity study is a report that interviews over 600 of your peers in the government contracting industry space. And the readout for that lets you know what your peers what topics are most important to your peers and how they're handling challenges within their industry. So this is the 13th year that Deltek has done a GovCon Clarity study, but the Clarity study in itself has been around for much longer than that. We also have studies that focus on architecture and engineering and construction. So we hire a firm that does interviews for 650 different employees in the industries that we serve. And it is based on, so we do these interviews at the beginning of 2022. So it is based on 2021 fiscal year data. So for the GovCon Clarity report, the focus areas are business development, project and risk management, human capital management, contract management, finance and financial compliance, information technology, and general market conditions. Today, we will be focusing on the manufacturing portion of Clarity, but please feel free to look at the other areas. We've included the full Clarity report up in the resource panel. So the top challenges that contractors with manufacturing operations are facing in 2021 and moving into 2022 are a need for improved supply chain visibility, talent management concerns, and a desire for better quality control. To address these challenges, the main approaches that companies plan to take include integrating their finance and manufacturing and providing access to suppliers to their systems. By investing in manufacturing execution systems, manufacturers are making sure that they're doing their manufacturing orders as most efficiently as possible, and they're able to have better visibility to identify inefficiencies or lag times. They're also investing in new software solutions, which Jonathan and Jesse will get more into later. More than half of the companies surveyed, or 54%, are tracking FTEs, units per hour production, and shipments on delivered time, being 51%. Keeping a close eye on the time spent preparing for and executing shop floor audits is of high interest to approximately a third of respondents. Moving away from outdated legacy systems and towards tools designed to meet rigid government compliance regulations is a meaningful step towards better quality control. This will increase the importance of the use of subcontractors, and the need to manage them also increases. So more and more, we're seeing that digital transformation initiatives are gaining momentum. Many manufacturers are putting their desire for digital transformation into action, and nearly 4 in 10 companies are planning to re-engineer processes. Nearly as many, 34%, plan to integrate manufacturing software to their ERP. Because re-engineering processes can be costly and can lead to delays in meeting critical shipping deadlines, if gaps in highly coveted talent exist, some work and tools will not be successful in the long term. So before I turn this over to Jesse and Jonathan, I just wanted to touch on a few trends that we're seeing in the manufacturing industry. Cybersecurity is huge. Manufacturing is actually the second most targeted industry for cyber attacks, and small and medium-sized manufacturers are prime targets if they do not have preventative measures put in place. Managing disruptions, you'll see that throughout the manufacturing industry right now, trying to become more agile. Supply chain uncertainty and workplace shortages are forcing manufacturers to pivot away and find better ways to manage disruption. Digital transformation, topic of today's webinar. Digital transformation technologies enable manufacturers to gain more visibility and automation into their processes. Industry 4.0 is coming, and even though we're still recovering, our economy is still recovering, we're seeing an increase in competition, and those that are innovating are gaining a competitive edge. So now turning it over to Jonathan and Jesse.
Thank you, Tara, and thanks to everybody for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Jonathan Davis, as the slide says, and I'm a Principal Solutions Engineer here at Deltek. If anyone's wondering what that means, it basically means that I generally go out and speak with some of our existing clients, also some of our new prospects, and understand their requirements around trying to fold manufacturing and trying to fold some supply chain into their ERP. Then I usually give them a demonstration, showing them how the solution can help them really move forward in a progressive way. Prior to coming over to Deltek, I was actually a cost point user. So I've been using some Deltek solutions for about a little over a decade, and my background is really all operational, right? So I went to school for supply chain management, really fell in love with manufacturing at that point, understanding how the manufacturing process worked. Then I started working at a government contracting firm who did manufacturing and really focused on the initial points, things like production planning, right? So being able to understand how we can take our end requirements from a customer, plan that through something like MRP, and ultimately deliver those products. Then moved over into some mass production scheduling as well. And then even was able to be a part of implementing some of our different pieces of software that Jesse and I will talk to a little bit later, things like MES solutions and things like automated timekeeping. At this point, Jesse, I'll pass it over to you because you have a lot more experience than me. You are the Yoda here in today's chat, so I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thanks, Jonathan. I don't know about that, but appreciate it. My name is Jesse Kepner. I work at PDS Consulting Solutions, joined the team this year. My background prior to that, I spent my whole career, 17 years out in industry at the major aerospace and defense primes. Started in engineering. That's my area of study. Started in electrical engineering, did about 5 years of electrical engineering design in a manufacturing environment, and moved into supply chain management, rising to the leadership roles there, senior leadership and supply chain for about 12 years in my career there. So all of it was in manufacturing. We did composite manufacturing and antenna design worked with some of our other business units, doing large systems, implementing, actually CostPoint in this case, implementing CostPoint and surrounding systems at some of our sister business units for major programs and major business units, many hundreds of millions of dollar revenue areas. So a lot of experience with connecting systems. We'll talk that later. But in my current role at PDS, helping businesses, implement and or optimize their solutions they have with a focus on the manufacturing and materials side, not looking at the ERP system just as an accounting tool, but looking at it as their business system and also helping to link it to these other systems we'll talk about as we progress here.
So as the title of this slide says, not innovating is risky. And while I know it's true that really any new ground that you walk into is risky just because of the unknown, really staying stagnant can cause rigidity, which makes things die. I don't want to get too philosophical here, but I was reading a book recently, and I came across a quote that just talks about how people are born soft and supple, but they end up, when they die, they're going to die stiff and hard. And it talked about the same thing with plants being born tender and pliant, but when the plants die, they are brittle and dry. And it really made me think about the aerospace and defense industry, right? Because as we know, if you think about aerospace and defense, just years ago, that was one of the more innovative industries in our entire world. And now if we think about some things from a more technology standpoint, we really could say that the aerospace and defense industry has fallen behind. And at this point, it does start to feel a little bit more like it's losing its flexibility. It's starting to become drying out. And that's really why digital transformation is such a huge thing. We know a lot of the customer requirements are starting to change. And really, there's never been a more important time to make sure that all your systems are working together seamlessly so that you can start to deliver your products more efficiently, so that customers can also just communicate and even bid their products at a better margin, right, to make sure that they're going to have profits in the future. Jesse, I know I kind of just spoke about that, but I find it really funny that the A&D industry was one of the more innovative industries, but now they're really starting to fall behind and feel like a dinosaur. Do you have any thoughts on why the A&D industry has been so slow to adopt new technology, and why you think that that's changing now with the whole digital transformation trend?
Yeah, prepping for this, I was really thinking about this. So my natural, coming from supply chain, an element of that being procurement, I had to deal with the FAR and the DFAR and federal acquisition regulations. That naturally feels like the reason everything's slow, and it probably is a big chunk of it. So you naturally, with the government, you have a lot of red tape, a lot of regulations, and those just keep being layered upon layered. So I think that's one reason. But with that said, I was sort of looking at this from a different approach. What changed in the landscape? Not now, but sort of over the past 50 years. And if you look at the second half of the 20th century, you had World War II, a bunch of major conflicts leading into the Cold War, massive nuclear arms race, space race. All these things were heavy motivators for change. And if you talk to folks that worked back in defense industry back then, it seemed like the good old days, right? Things were, money was readily available. Things were just, focused on that one goal. And back then they were competing with the Soviets. We didn't have the same boots on the ground troops. We didn't have that, so we had to compete in different arenas. So they looked at technology superiority, and I read about a topic called offsets, where they sort of had these goals, right? They were tied to nuclear parity at one point, being the nuclear weapons and the delivery platforms. After that, was superiority was gained there. Next, they started focusing on the reliability of hitting targets, precision guided munitions, radars, positioning, communications. And after that, the curtain fell, and now suddenly we didn't necessarily need that, have that same motivator. So, once we got into conflicts in the 90s and into the 2000s, relying on proven technologies became the norm. And it was just a change in philosophy. And that's really where the industry has been for a while, the don't fix what isn't broken mentality, leaning on incremental change of existing technologies because they've invested so heavily in these technologies, and being risk averse to making huge changes for fear of, obsoleting systems or just the massive investment it will take to create a new system versus upgrading existing stuff. You compare that to the commercial industry, and with capitalism and it being a global in nature, it's an adapt or die philosophy. So, industry has moved on, whereas aerospace and defense industry has said, hey, we still got the government as our customer. DoD's not making massive change. We don't need to make massive change because the government doesn't have that same, paradigm they're up against. So, with that said, the landscape has once again changed. So we've sort of been in this lull period, and now, with the rise of China mainly, it's becoming a massive push at the government level. Whether they're behind the curve or not, you could argue, they're quickly changing the tune. And with the cyber landscape changing and just the rapid nature of technology development, they can't lean on this old way of doing things. I was at a conference a couple weeks ago in Dayton, Ohio. We have the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base here locally, and Right Dialogue in Industry and Life Cycle Industry Days, and it was put on by the Air Force. And I listened to a few generals speak on these topics, leaders at AFRL and other big leaders within DoD, Air Force. And they said, basically, this is not a we'd like to do, it was a we must do. To keep up with China, we must change our mode of thinking and fully commit to digital transformation. Most of that conference was focused on digital transformation. And that's beyond what we're probably talking here today. We're talking digital manufacturing, but it's a piece of digital transformation. Digital transformation, I heard a lot of discussion from, this is the front end of, the platforms, the technologies they're trying to develop from the ground up. They want to move to a full digital transformation, meaning digital twins of the platforms. Everything's developed in a physics-based model, all digitally, before they ever put, metal or composites on a tool. Doing all that before they hit go to actually manufacture, so they can rapidly iterate these designs hundreds, thousands of times before they ever start to create something physically. That's a change in thinking, right? You used to build something, test it, build a new one, test it. That takes a lot of time. So systems like GBSD, Ground-Based Strategic Deterrent, they're starting to actually deploy these strategies on. I saw those at past employers where they're starting to implement these digital transformation strategies, and they're able to, in a much more cost-effective way and much more rapidly, develop these technologies. And that's where the government is going. And that carries through to digital manufacturing, which is what we're going to talk more here about. But, digital manufacturing sort of picks it up from that thread that started all the way back at that, physics-based model on the design side. But once we start to be ready to actually manufacture, now it's continuing that digital thread through the lineage of the parts we're creating, all the quality data, linking it all together, cost data, et cetera. So, there's a huge driver for our need to go down this path, whether we're on board or not. The train's moving.
That's a great point, Jesse. Something that you said actually just made me laugh and think about it. My question to you was like, why is the A&D industry so slow to adapt? But when you compared it to some of like the commercial industries, it actually took me to appliances, right? And I remember growing up that appliances, you buy a good refrigerator or you buy a good car, and it's going to last you for X amount of years, right? And it seems like nowadays that's not the case. You buy a washer or dryer, and you got to buy another one in the next 5 years. It seems like now, as I thought about it, the aerospace and defense industry, they don't have that same luxury, right? You cannot sell the government a plane that's going to break down in 2 years. So I can understand why some of the hesitancy has been to not adapt to some of the newer technologies and try to just say, we know that this works, we want to stay and build this. So what you said was a great point. It just made me think about that and laugh a little bit, because I can't imagine anything that the companies we were working for having limited quality on purpose, like some of the commercial stuff we bought. And I think you really alluded to this really well too, Jesse, just about what digital manufacturing is, kind of how it folds into digital transformation. We're going to do a deep dive talking about the different systems and the processes that link the entire production area together, as well as linking to things like your financials and everyone in the company having the visibility to understand what is happening in production, right? We really want to just talk about what digital transformation is creating that entire integrated approach across the entire thing. This, you know, when we just think about the new business process, I'm kind of tripping over my words because I'm excited to talk about just really what digital transformation is and some of the points that we may have as we walk through, as we start to talk through what digital transformation is in the industry. So before we actually dive into, you know, how digital transformation can help, let's actually take a look at some of the key elements, and then we'll also talk about some of the definitions that we have related to digital transformation. So we're going to talk about a lot of those innovative technologies on the next slide, so I won't really harp on that point today, or I should say I am going to talk about it today, but I won't harp on it right this minute. But when I look at data management, right, data is really key to how we think about digital transformation. We need to focus on understanding how the data from various data sources, so when we say data sources, various pieces of software, how that can be passed seamlessly and accurate between those individual pieces of software to help us actually make better decisions, more informed decisions, and even help us make the right decisions, right? When we start to think about how an engineer designs a part and how we're supposed to build it to this specific, you know, detail, we need to be able to make sure that that is translated correctly to the actual shop floor operator who's going to do the physical work. And then that needs to also be translated to the inspector who's going to inspect the work to make sure that they are checking everything to the right spec. The data that we talk about today is, I mean, I'm probably going to say data 50 or 100 times today, but data is really the key. Digital transformation is really about the data. The data is going to help us make more informed decisions, and data is going to help us be accurate as far as what we're doing. Jesse, can you talk to us a little bit about just some of the business processes that you've seen involved, and especially when we start to talk about change management and the role that those have in digital transformation?
Yeah, I think on the business process, and this will go into sort of the implementation philosophy as we talk through here, but you know, to adopt a digital transformation strategy, it's not just I'm going to go buy this piece of software, I'm going to go buy that piece of software. It's a philosophy, it's a strategy. It should be a core tenet of your business. You know, it should be the processes within your business. Your business processes are not going to have these solutions bolted onto them. If you think that's going to succeed, you know, you will see very minor incremental improvements, in my opinion. You know, you have to really rethink your business processes with that philosophy at the core. So you have to overhaul your business processes. It doesn't mean you don't build the product the way you intend to build it, but it means you build it with that digital landscape now in mind. So you know, instead of keying it over here or writing it on a piece of paper, you build it into your process where they do it digitally in whatever system that's most appropriate for that particular data. You know, so just bolting them on is going to be an inefficient way of doing it. I mean, you can do it that way, but it's just not going to really work in the grand scheme. The ROI won't be there. You know, lead to a lot of dual entry and inefficiencies. So embedding them at the core of your process will allow you to, you know, create an agile and efficient process where you're not doing anything more than you need to do. You're doing things with the end goal in mind, which is that digital transformation.
Perfect, Jesse. Thanks. So then we'll actually head over to some of the definitions at this point. So if folks are familiar with working with the government, like almost everything, we have more alphabet soup here, right? So we thought that before Jesse and I started talking about these various systems and using acronyms that the government and that this industry uses so often, we just thought it would be a good idea to kind of walk through and talk about what these acronyms mean, what these systems are, for anyone who may not be familiar. Now, this is not an all-encompassing list of the different business systems that may be captured up under digital transformation, but we thought that this is at least a good place to start and a good baseline to cover a lot of the systems that we're going to talk about in today's conversation. So if I look first at just the ERP, and I think you've heard both Jesse and I mention ERP systems. ERP stands for Enterprise Resource Planning, and really you can think about a system that manages the day-to-day activities of a business. Now, a lot of times people think about that as being your accounting activity, your finance, but it ranges into your procurement activities. It can get into things like inventory and ultimately into manufacturing. So the ERP is a huge part of this because we want to start to talk about how we can take these other systems and integrate them to the ERP so that the folks who are running that, mostly your finance folks, your accounting, your CFOs, they have visibility into understanding what's going on as well. Then we head down to an MES system, and that MES acronym just stands for Manufacturing Execution System. And you can think about this system as a way to digitize the manufacturing process. So we're going to talk a little bit. There's a couple other definitions here too, but as we think about designing parts and the engineers are figuring out, hey, there's actually a manufacturing engineering group, right, who their most of their roles are to figure out, hey, how do we design this to be manufactured in an efficient way? So as they're designing that and saying, hey, this is how we should build this, these are the steps that we should take, these manufacturing execution systems will allow you to actually pass that data along digitally to the shop floor operators. So instead of me going off and working off of a paper, I'm actually using my computer or using a tablet to access those instructions and actually be able to walk down through and do the build properly. The PLM is just a product lifecycle management software. And again, we start talking about that design portion. A lot of that design activity, really it's the PLM is tracking that product from design. So once that product has been established, we understand the parts, the bills of material, the structure of all that part that's going to happen, and then starting to even monitor that through the manufacturing process. So manufacturing documentation may be there. And then even as we start to sell the units and some of the aftermarket things, some people are tracking that in that product lifecycle management just to have an understanding from cradle to grave about what happened with the product, right? As it was designed, how many of these we've manufactured, and then also how they're tracking in the field. Walking down into the QMS, a quality management system. High level, you can think of that as just a system to be able to capture the defects that may occur during your manufacturing process, the defects that may even be delivered to you from your vendors. So as vendors are providing you with product, being able to inspect that product in a detailed way, being able to write down that, hey, this part came in, it was not to spec. We want to find out how we actually disposition that product and end up getting the right product in-house. And then we walk into like a timekeeping system. So just different ways to capture the actual touch labor of those employees who are doing the work on the manufacturing floor. This can span, of course, from people who are writing down their time in an old paper fashion, right? I worked on this work order for 3 hours today, and I worked on that one for 2 hours, up to getting really digital, automated punch in, punch outs onto different operations, onto different work orders. Then we get into CAD, which is going to be some computer-aided design. Jesse actually alluded to this earlier when he spoke about really that digital twin, right? And being able to have companies actually build and model that twin, doing it without building that part physically. A lot of people are using just a CAD program to even build out the part and design it without buying the physical parts and building those together. And it's really an engineering tool to model those assemblies so that ultimately, as they are complete, they can roll like into the PLM. So where the parts and the bombs can all be established there. And then the last one on this list is just barcoding, right? And machine readable code that will make transacting different things more efficient. Maybe that's labor and time collection. I want to be able to scan and tell you what work order I'm working on instead of me typing something in. Maybe it's through inventory transactions. I want to be able to scan and tell you what parts I've consumed in an order, what serial numbers, what lot IDs I'm consuming here, instead of us hand keying this information in. Now, one thing I do want to say about all these systems is that there's a huge variation. This can be something that's as simple as a spreadsheet, especially thinking about something like that quality management system. Maybe I'm using a spreadsheet to document all those, all the way growing into fully robust systems, right? Software products, things that people are using, and then we're taking those software products and, of course, building the integrations. We may find multiple of these tools in one software solution, or we may take some other ones and now tie them together. So that was just a quick refresher, and just wanted to go through before me and Jesse start talking about all these different acronyms. Now when we say PLM or we say MES, hopefully it's a good background as far as what we're talking about. So at this point, we'll go all the way back to how digital transformation can help us. And one thing at the high level is just, Jesse really talked about, when I asked him the question about why things are moving so slow, he talked about the red tape that exists, in the government contracting industry. And we think about things that you see on the screen, MMAS, some of the quality standards like AS9100 that people need to adhere to, some of the ISO standards, that, again, as far as the business processes. And then we even get into cybersecurity, so things like CMMC, and making sure that people have the products and have the detail, have the data in the correct systems from a cybersecurity standpoint, because as I just talked about on the previous slide, some of that stuff is being done in Excel. But Excel doesn't necessarily have that built-in cybersecurity needs that you may have to make sure that that data is going to be protected from anyone who may be trying to get it, any foreign adversaries, or just anyone who's not really here to help the government meet their purpose. Then talking about just managing changes and disruptions, the ECNs of, here's another alphabet soup that we have here, but ECN is representative just of engineering change notices. And I thought I really talk a little bit about where I used to work and kind of how, when I started there about 12 years ago, and really how disjointed a lot of our systems were. And I think that we started to walk down that process of digital transformation, which helped us a lot. But if I can just talk about when I first got there, so we were a design house. Our parent company would actually do all the designs of our parts. They would deliver us the designs, and we were their manufacturing leg. So we would go ahead and now build those parts basically to the print and how our parent company had designed the parts. So the parent company will work on the designs of all these in various engineering tools. We talk about some CAD programs. We could also talk about some other engineering programs that they would use to go ahead and model out the parts as they wanted to design them and develop them. Once that was complete, they would pass that over to us in a package, and they would actually interact a little bit with our product lifecycle management, or our PLM system. So they could enter some documentation in there as far as the parts that they've used in the design, how the parts will be structured into their BOMs. But then now it was on our configuration management team to make sure that those parts and BOMs were loaded correctly into the PLM, right? Because the engineers may have had a certain focus making sure they were getting different pieces of data in the system, but then our configuration management team will work and make sure that that would translate to us on the production side. So once they would interact with the PLM system, then we actually had a liaison between our configuration management team and our manufacturing engineering team, who would work on making sure that the parts and the BOMs that were entered in our PLM system would now be represented in our ERP. And if you think about that just from a high level, really you're talking about a single point of failure, right? We're assigning this responsibility to one individual to make sure that you convert all the information that we have in this PLM system over to our ERP, because that is what's going to now drive us through production. And not that the person wasn't doing a really good job, but there would be mistakes that would happen, right? So there may be times where a part was not indicated correctly as a make or a buy on the bill of material. So now we're processing a purchase order for a part that can't actually be bought from that vendor. Or we're waiting to buy, or we're waiting to build a part, but we don't actually have a BOM loaded for that, so we can't even buy the right components, and we needed to get that part on a PO to one of our vendors. So there's really a lot of places where that data can be misconstrued, and it causes a heartache downstream, right? Where now we're circling and we're scrambling and we're trying to make up time. So if you think about kind of that web that I just talked about, imagine trying to push an engineering change through that, right? So when the customer comes back, or we are using those parts out in the field, and they say, hey, I need you to now update this. It will go through that same process, right? Where the PLM would get involved. We will be working back with our design authority at our parent company. Then the CM, that liaison, again, is responsible for making sure that the BOMs are updated correctly in our ERP. And I can remember parts because me, as being the planner, I'm ultimately the blame man, I should say, but where there were parts that I didn't order, right? Because I wasn't aware our BOM wasn't updated accurately. So when MRP would go ahead and run, it never gave me an action message to buy that part. And that's something that people felt, well, we should have caught that during our CCBs or our change control board meetings, right? But when we're talking about all these disparate systems, we're looking for people to catch things with their eyes instead of being able to capture things through the system, letting the system validate that that information is passing back and forth properly. In addition, we just have things like information silos that make it very difficult for companies to have true visibility into their costs. Government contracting is about understanding the cost, right? The government wants you to be able to prove that the costs that are incurred on this are accurate, and you as a company want to make sure that that the costs are being captured accurately so that you can bid future work and still have a healthy, reasonable profit margin in that. So time charging is an example that we talked about on the previous slide, where if you're using separate time charging systems to where you're actually managing everything in the ERP, that time may not be allocated and tied directly to your different parts and the products that you're building. And that can make it really difficult to understand how much it really costs to build a part, which of course is going to make it harder for you to bid that part in the future. I'm not even going to start to talk about some of the COVID-based supply chain disruptions that have happened, because we might have this fireside chat go on for 2 more hours. So I'm going to stop there. And Jesse, I'm just wondering, I know based on your experience, I know you came from an environment that really had a mix. Can you talk about, what it's like to build these integrations between different systems and some of the benefits that you've seen from operating in a more integrated environment?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, I've come from the worlds that you just described as well, in the same company in different business units where we did major implementations, where we integrated a lot of those tools you listed on the previous slide all together. We had probably 50 to 60 touch points of tools talking in a major implementation we did. It took a long time, was highly complex, but doing it, the business couldn't have survived without doing that. It had to automate things. It had to have, HMI interfaces and APIs talking from system to system. And what we focused on as we were doing that whole effort early on, it was really about what's the book of record for each of these data elements. The part master, the ERP system has a part master, but is that really the book of record, or is your PLM system the book of record for that? Where is the core data housed? And then everything should feed off that. You talked about double entry. So in that case, there wasn't double entry. They had the PLM system connected directly to the ERP system. When change notices were rolled to the PLM system and all the rigor that it takes to do those design changes, those flowed through to the ERP system. They flowed through the MES system subsequently that was connected. So that was sort of on the design side, if you will. And that, real-time data, those updates are flowing through. They're not relying on a single point failure. They're not, there's no data entry errors. There's no redundancy in data entry, even if there aren't, fat fingering errors. That all leads to efficiency. We also saw, where we would hook, the MES system was connected to the machines themselves. In some cases, there were automated processes, so data feedback from the machine saying how much of this was put down or how much of that was used, in addition to, technicians interacting with their consoles in the MES system to say, I use this serial number on this part, I use this quantity of this or that, right through their normal work instructions, which previously would have been paper. With the traveler floating around the floor, they're interacting with that system, but that system doesn't then print out a report and someone has to go key that into the ERP system. We were actually connecting those things so that, those transactions happened automatically, right? So auto consumption was happening based on a feed, an input from one system. So 2 separate systems that, are not even correlated by the same, software company, but, using APIs to have them talk and feed that data. So with the click of a barcode scanner and an enter key on the keyboard, suddenly an issue transaction from inventory would happen in the background while you also recorded the lineage of what went into that part in your MES system, which tied to your quality system, which tied to your ERP system. We saw things where, automation of, a quality buy-off in one system would, close work orders, prep things for shipment. And all that data led to the business intelligence, side. So this massive trove of data that's all consolidated in all these systems that speak the same language now, that helps with better decision making, timely decision making. Now you're not, correlating data or collating data from a bunch of different systems manually in a spreadsheet to try to figure out, are you doing well or not? It also led to, the preparation of packages, as built packages for sell-off, in an ISO or AS 9100 type quality system. You need all that pedigree, and having these all linked made that very easy. It was all there. Without that, you have these silos, lots of manual, collation. You have, the concerns about paper control and obsolescence. So you roll a change, if it has to trickle all the way down to your paperwork floating around on the floor, how do you know you have all the paper collected and you don't have someone working off the wrong work instructions? So, there's cost to putting all this stuff in, but it actually, it should pay back in dividends in the long run. From an efficiency standpoint, from a risk reduction standpoint, and from your audit standpoint, I don't know how many audits I went through where I could point to things within, multiple systems and be able to, get people what the data they needed. So, having that all in one system was great.
For sure. Those are great points, Jesse. So then from here, we want to talk a little bit about just kind of the winning strategy when we think about digital transformation, right? So, I know we've kind of spoken about some pieces of this. One thing that jumped out to me on this slide was really just identifying the goals. Because I think I mentioned earlier that I was reading a book. Look, I don't read books all the time. I know it makes me sound like I do, but it's the same book. But it's really kind of about habit forming is what the book's about. And I thought that, there was a point where they talk about kind of how these habits are formed. And it's like you kind of get to a certain plateau and then you add and stack a little bit of the next thing onto it. And then you want to get to that plateau and then you add something else there. And that really made me think about just how we can attack goals when we think about digital transformation. Jesse, what you just laid out was perfect. It's in terms of, this is going to be a pretty lengthy investment, right? Where, hey, I need to understand, really what parts of the business I'm going to impact and when I'm going to impact them. And to me, that really comes down to identifying how you're planning to roll everything out and being able to measure those goals efficiently and really just having, I'd say, achievable goals, right? When we start to try to bite off too much at once, it makes the task seem daunting. It makes us seem like we're never going to get to the end. And that can really deflate a bunch of people. And that lower morale will lead to this digital transformation strategy not working, right? I've seen a lot of companies who've actually gone out and bought pieces of software, started the implementation process, and not finished it, right? And to me, that does come down a lot to just the goals and how that project was planned to be rolled out in the first place. And I think that by properly identifying those goals, it will make it easier. One, people will feel success as they're moving along. So, hey, I got to step one in our goal. We can have a little mini celebration. Then we get to step two, and it keeps that morale going. People work at things that they feel that is achievable, right? I was, again, coming across something where if I'm trying to learn how to play tennis, I'm not going to go out and play against Serena Williams or Roger Federer because they're going to kill me and I'm going to quit playing, right? So I can't let the goal be that big. I've got to bite off reasonable chunks. Jesse, we were talking about this before, and I thought you made a really good point about this business processes earlier. So I was wondering, how do you think that existing business processes should factor into this winning strategy? And what are some of the ways you've gotten some management buy-in to make sure that it's moving in the right way?
Yeah, as we discussed earlier, it's that rethinking of the whole business process is important. But in terms of getting buy-in, other than the industry's mandating it, the C-suite wants to see some kind of benefit. They want to see an ROI. So I think it's important to understand and to show that these transformations, they're self-serving in many ways, right? Sometimes you have these mandates that come down to you and you just have to do it, and it's going to cost you money. But this is one that I think actually pays back for itself. It may not, maybe initial investment, but long-term it's going to make the business more agile and efficient. So, showing that they meet the evolving customer requirements. So that's the compliance standpoint. You got to do that. You don't really have a choice. But, going into it with a positive attitude because you realize that you're going to actually get benefit out of it, and it's not just, paying for the solution because you got to do it. So, helping them see the agility and efficiency it will achieve for your company is important. it really directly supports a lean process methodology. I don't know a place that I've worked where our business processes were the most efficient, right? There were things we always wanted to change, and if I was given the opportunity to rehash my business process, in many cases I would have gladly taken it, because if I could get people to throw out the old way of thinking and rethink it, with all the things that they probably already recognized were holes in the process, we could also incorporate this digital strategy, and in doing so, just make our process more efficient, right? Computers help us all day long if we use them properly. So, on top of that, convincing people that'll help with compliance, all those things really, lead to the buy-in. And making sure that it's, I think the first steps, and we might talk with the next slide, but developing a digital transformation roadmap and making before it's sort of that planning up front is worth its weight in gold. So you do that planning up front, not just what's our PLM system going to be, but what is our overall digital strategy for transformation in the long run? 5-year strategy, whatever that time horizon is, doesn't really matter. But then you drive your decisions collectively around that. So everything you do, should be based with that sort of at the core. So your decisions are not short-sighted. They're they're long-term decisions that it's a pay me now or pay me later philosophy, and that planning up front will lead to the right tools, the right decisions, et cetera.
Very good points, Jesse. Very good points. So I think what you just hit on was talking about creating that digital roadmap. That's kind of at the bottom. So as we move over to the next slide. Really, this is kind of a checklist, right? About really, it's a recap of a lot of things that we've said that, being able to, and I'm going to double down on your point, maybe I'm triple downing on it at this point, Jesse, just about the business processes, right? And I think earlier you talked about, you can't take and buy these softwares and try to just bolt them on to what you already have going on, right? It's really about taking a deep, and I feel like I'm being philosophical again, but being very introspective and looking at what the business is doing, right? Are we doing this because we've always done it this way? Is there a more efficient way to be doing this, right? And understanding what your business process is going to be. And then as you said, hey, these newer tools, computers are going to help us. Let's reimagine some of this, right? Maybe we don't have to take these steps anymore because we know that we have a computer system or a piece of software that can help us, double check what we're doing, right? We don't have to, be so monotonous in some of the tasks. So I thought that was a really good point in just talking about those business processes. And really that's the key to me, right? Understanding what you're trying to do and being able to move forward. Then identifying some of those technology requirements, what pieces of software do we need to take a deeper dive into? What should we evaluate for our business to figure out how we can work in a more efficient manner, right? And I won't walk down through the rest of this plan because I actually really want to lean on the expert, which is you, Jesse, when we talk about implementing some of these strategies. So I'm wondering, are there any thoughts you have around the best way for the companies to implement some of the strategies that we have listed here?
Yeah, I mean, and we hit on a lot of the same points throughout this, but first, that digital roadmap I can't emphasize enough, right? That it's the project plan, right, up front. Doing that should be the core, in any implementation. You don't do these just willy-nilly. You really have to have a plan and a long-term plan. Otherwise, you'll just be bolting on things, and you won't be gaining nearly the efficiency you think you're gaining. But once the rubber hits the road, realistically, most companies can't afford, nor do they have, the staff, et cetera, to just implement everything all at once. So, we really typically see people, once they have that roadmap of where they want to be and, when they grow up, if you will, when they get to that state, the end desired state, then it's looking sort of at an 80-20 rule or, in the most cost-effective way, looking at how do you get the biggest bang for the buck. So it's that phased approach, right? You don't need all the systems at once. Find the systems that are most critical to your business that will make the most, strategic impact and efficiency impact to your business and meet, customer requirements, and implement them in a phased approach. But again, it starts with a plan of where that phased approach gets you in the long run, not just, well, phase one, that's all we've thought about. We haven't thought about phase two. If you haven't thought about phase two, then you might be implementing the wrong solution in phase one. You know, at PDS Consulting Solutions, we help with that, right? We, help people map that out as they're thinking about where they want to go, all the way up front. A lot of people start with their ERP system. That's what they're thinking about, but they want all these other things. Usually the discussion, obviously always comes down at some point to how much is it going to cost and how much time is it going to take. So usually it's those small wins that get them biggest bang for the buck but with the landscape already laid out up front. That avoids that. I think you said it earlier, people implementing tools that sort of die on the vine because they never actually finish, because it's such a big project that they just get burnt out on it, and it just never gets to the end state. So having those small wins, I remember reading about organizational change, that's one of the biggest things is small wins. Like you were talking with tennis and such, it's important that we have small wins along the way, and doing it in a phased approach, as long as it's a coordinated phased approach, I think is how you get there most successfully and most cost effectively.
Beautiful. Well said, Jesse. So I know we're wrapping up, we're getting towards the end. So I think we wanted to close a little bit of, our fireside chat just on, what do you gain from digital transformation? And, Jesse and I know we felt that, we've kind of repeated ourselves a lot throughout this, but the thing is that this stuff, it's really important, right? And I think that, the same things that we talk about, we'll be able to move you through as you start to walk down your digital transformation journey. So the one thing that I'll just jump on this side is, kind of getting back to those costs, right? Assurance that all the costs are going to be collected accurately and calculated accurately. That, when we think about government contracting, to me, that is one of the hugest things, right? Again, you have to be able to prove to them how much this part is going to cost me, how much I'm actually bidding on it to pay, to be able to price it out for. And just making sure that as you start to buy those parts, you're buying all your raw components, you're buying and building your sub-assemblies, being able to show that those costs are hitting the different contracts accurately, just to be able to show that you're doing things in the most efficient manner, or the most efficient way. You're time phasing your material. You're doing things that, again, make you good stewards of the funds that you've been provided by the government. Jesse, I know I'm rushing a little bit, but anything you want to add when we start to think about just the benefits of digital transformation overall?
No, I mean, I think you summed it up. It's really that, all the data is in this, hub, right? Whether it's in multiple systems, they're all working together, and you can report on that environment and get the data you need to make decisions, whether it be new proposals or data to your customers, or, God forbid you have an escapement, you have that data to know the lineage of all the parts out there and be able to, quickly identify impacts and deal with that. That's where the government needs us to be, and that's where, your business should want to be realistically. That's just a good best practice.
Perfect. So we did want to just put a plug in really fast to talk about some of the other GovCon University webinars that we are offering. So there's a few that you'll see here that are already available on demand. And then there's some upcoming next month and in October that are going to be live, just like the one that you joined today. You'll also always be able to watch this one on demand in the future as well. And there's a link to register for those at the bottom. Now we want to open it up for some polling questions to the audience. So if everyone can interact with us, you probably can see the question up here, but just would you like to learn more about how Deltek CostPoint can help you with your digital manufacturing needs? And we'll give you a few seconds to be able to answer that question for us. So thank you. Jesse, I can see that about 4 people have responded, so we didn't put everyone to sleep during the fireside chat today. So congratulations to both of us for that. And then we'll move on to the next question. Is just if we can interact with this one as well. would you like to learn more about PDS Consulting Solutions, which is where Jesse's reporting live from. So we'll leave that one open. And now at this point, we will open it up for question and answers. So any questions that you have, please put directly in the box that you see in the webinar. And it looks like we do have one question already, a couple questions actually. So I'll actually pose this one to you, Jesse. So they said our company is moving from an R&D or research and development company to a product production and manufacturing company. What systems should we look at implementing first?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally the core is your ERP system, right? Because it touches not just your financial and accounting side. It's your whole hub of manufacturing, right? You have, yes, you can, not non-ideal, you can have paper work instructions, you can have a scheduling system that's not connected, that's not the desired long-term state, but you can survive with that sort of thing. But your ERP system is where all that cost data is. It's where your business intelligence typically starts. It's really connected to all your work orders on the floor, all your purchase orders, all your inventory. So, really to get into digital manufacturing, you really need to start with all that data being digitized. And from there, the tools are built such that, they interact with a lot of the other tools as you start to grow that space. So I think that's probably the most important starting point.
I would agree wholeheartedly. Then another question that popped in is just, do Deltek's manufacturing solutions and ERP meet MMAS requirements? And Jesse, I'll let you answer that one too, if you don't mind.
Well, I don't work for Deltek, but yes, they do. So, I used Cost Point for my career. That's how I ended up in consulting it. Became an expert in it because I used it every day, and my team used it every day. And we went through whether internal or external MMAS audits. We went through that with success. That tool was the hub of that data. MMAS goes beyond that. It's, things around, is it timely? Is the demand timely? It goes into your requirements. I can't recite all the requirements off the top of my head, but it's about scheduling of that, demand. Are you buying the right stuff at the right time to support the right need? But your ERP is a big part of that. MRP tied to that and your demand that you put into your ERP system. So yeah, Deltek's Cost Point solution meets those needs. It doesn't stand alone, right? There's other elements of MMAS, but Cost Point's a big chunk of that.
Jesse, you answered that as if you were a Deltek employee. I didn't want to sound too salesy, so I appreciate you fulfilling that question. Just checking to see if there is any other questions. Looks like we do have one more. It just says, can you please expand upon the MES and PLM systems? How do they function individually as well as tie into the other systems? So I could start, and then Jesse, I could just pass it over to you. But when we think about just process-wise, generally in the manufacturing process, the PLM system kind of exists before the ERP, right? The PLM system is where a lot of that design activity could be happening. The product is actually starting its initial part of its life cycle. Then those parts and BOMs can tie to directly to an ERP. They can actually tie directly to an MES system as well, right? So be able to send over those parts and BOMs to your manufacturing execution system. And then the work plans or the work instructions that are being generated by your manufacturing engineering group actually can tie to those specific parts and those BOMs. So both systems they function individually, but they have a lot of overlap, and even passing data back and forth between the ERP as well. And Jesse, I'll leave that question to you as well.
Yeah, I mean, you described how they really function independently, but they all feed on similar data, right? Your parts are defined in your PLM system, but you need your parts to buy them and build them in your ERP system. You need your parts and BOMs and routers in your MES system to build them as well, right? That's where you do the actual work instructions and you execute against them. But that router also is typically in your ERP system. Maybe it's in PLM possibly, but typically I haven't seen that. But your BOMs are in your PLM system typically, or at least your EBOM. Your MBOM might not be. Your MBOM might be managed in the ERP system, but that's tied to your MES system as well. So they really, where is the book of record again is always what you have to focus on. And there is no one way that it must be. I've seen different businesses treat it differently. I don't know if there's a best in breed out there on that. I'm not sure, but I've seen it multiple ways and it's worked multiple ways. But either way, you house the data in multiple systems. Hopefully not. If they're not connected, you're doing that manually, right? That's what we don't want, right? Having your parts created in your PLM system, and that's your book of record, yet you have to manually create them in your ERP system and manually create them in your MES system. That creates that data disparity and potential for problems with your data. But, that's how they would function independently of one another, as well as a system with one another. So hopefully we answered your question there.
Thank you to all for submitting those questions. Great questions. Thank you for joining us for our website or our fireside chat, and I'm going to pass it back over to Leslie. But thanks so much, Jesse, as well.
Thank you.
And before we officially conclude, we want to remind you that you'll be receiving an on-demand recording of today's webinar via email within 24 hours. If we were not able to get to your question today, we will be sure to follow up directly with you offline. Also, we'd appreciate if you fill out the short survey that you'll see at the conclusion of the webinar. Remember, if you'd like to view additional webinars as part of our GovCon University webinar series, you can visit deltek.com where you can find a complete listing. And with that, I'd like to thank our speakers for today, Tara, Jonathan, and Jesse. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, all of you for taking some time to join us today. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.